Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I'm going to talk about the Esterbrook Estie and their MV adapter, which allows you to take this contemporary pen and use vintage Esterbrook nibs. They came in a variety of shapes and functions and price points in the 1950s on this contemporary pen. I was fortunate enough to be lent this pen and some other Esterbrook pens by Denise Badash, who's a good friend and has a wonderful Instagram feed called Science Notes, and she does these terrific books that she journals and calligraphies and collages. I, in fact, interviewed her and did her portrait, and I'm going to watch for that in this space. In the next month or so, I have to edit it and get it all together, but I think that's going to be quite wonderful. Anyway, she lent me this pen and some other pens to try out the adapter. And here you can see the Estie pen, two versions of them, really nice colors. This sort of tortoise color one, or I guess light orange, and this is more of a burgundy color resin. And here's the classic Esterbrook J pen from the 1950s, vintage pens that you can get for very reasonable price. For those of you who watch my channel, you know that last year I purchased for a bargain price an incredible collection of these vintage pens, something like almost 24 of them, 24 of them. At one time, Esterbrook was the #1 pen company in the United States. It started in the mid-19th century, where it pioneered the mass production of steel nibs for dip pens, and such nibs continue to be a major part of their business up through the 1960s. Indeed, the great Charles Schulz used an Esterbrook nib to draw peanuts, and Lyndon Johnson used an Esterbrook pen to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Actually, interestingly enough, seemingly a dip pen to do that. Esterbrook only got into fountain pen business relatively late in the 1920s. I mean, in comparison to, let's say, Waterman or Parker or Conklin. And when it did, it tended to concentrate on making a solid, everyday pen for working class and middle class consumers, not a super expensive pen. And instead of creating sort of flashy pens or decorative pens or a lot of different models, they focused on what they were always best known for, which were the nibs. They offered, into the 1950s, over 40 different choices in fountain pen nibs. Their J series pen, which is this one, has a nib in it. Let me just show you that unscrews, and you can get these in many different forms and functions, and they simply screw in and out, which is very convenient. Now, they call these nibs renew points. They touted choice as the pen selling points, although I think they're actually quite nicely designed, and it's actually a beautiful pen, but it doesn't stand out in comparison to some of the gorgeous pens that Parker and Schaefer was making, and the streamlined Parker 51 and the different kinds of filling systems. They use this traditional filling system, this lever system that uses a sack inside it. And works quite well. The thing about the sack is that it only lasts for a while, 30 years, quite a while. I think much longer than people even thought. But by now, if you have a pen that hasn't been restored, the sac has probably dried out. Fortunately, it's quite easy to replace the sac. And since these Esterbrook pens are so affordable, it's a great place to start out if you want to start collecting vintage pens and also learn how to replace the sac, because it's really quite easy to do if you follow many instructions that are on YouTube on how to do it. So it's a great place to start out if you're trying to think about going in the direction of collecting. Now, with the rise of the ballpoint pen, Esterbrook eventually went out of business in 1971, but in 2014, the name was bought up, and finally the Kenro Company, which also has other luxury pen lines, they bought up Esterbrook, the name, and started to produce the Esterbrook Estie pen. Now, this pen actually comes in a much larger size. It's very similar looking. Here, by the way, is a comparison of the large size with the smaller size. The large size is approximately 6 inches long. The smaller size is 5 3/4. This company, which wants to sort of revive the great tradition of Esterbrook, didn't go out of their way to imitate the look of the Esterbrook J pen, at least initially, and certainly not in the Estie pen. They do have another pen which they call, I believe, the JR pen, and that does look a little bit more like the this classic pen. But this picked pen, in terms of its material, it has this wonderful resin, this beautiful resin, and it's turned is very different from the way the plastic is handled in the original J pen, and obviously in the size, even the shape of the pen, it's very different. Now, this pen also doesn't use the smaller nibs. You can see this. It uses a number 6 nib, very standard nib, Jovo nib, which has been customized with their logo, but nevertheless is much bigger nib than the original screw-out nibs that were in the vintage pens. So that's different. The great thing about these pens, however, is that they use converters, which I think is a much superior filling system to the kind of filling system that you have with the lever fill. Now, this pen doesn't have an ink window. I wish it did. It's kind of translucent, but you really can't see how much ink is in it. But at least you can unscrew it and look at the converter. The big disadvantage for me, well, there are many disadvantages about the lever fill. In terms of cleaning, these pens are really not meant to be used with multiple colors where you're constantly changing and cleaning them out. When you do that, you push the leather and pull the leather up and down, there's a chance you're going to break it. In those days, in the 50s, people either used blue or black, and they kept the same color in it, so they didn't have to clean out the pen a lot. Today, if you're using a pen and you're switching colors, the converter is a much more convenient thing in terms of cleaning out the pen, and it doesn't put the kind of stress on the pen that you do with a lever filler. So this is a big advantage in the newer pens. What else can I say about it? Here's another thing, though, that is really nice about these pens and different. Is the way they screw shut. So when you close them, they have this lovely little bounce to it because they're spring loaded, I guess is the term for the caps. So they bounce in and out. And let's see if I can show that with a flashlight. Let's see. Inside there is this sort of inner cap that has a spring that allows it to do that. That has an advantage too, because if you look at this pen and you look at the cap, what's kind of unusual about it is when you have a resin cap like this, usually you want to have a band, or you have to make it fairly thick resin, and it's not. This is very light and thin and translucent, but usually you have to make it thick because you're screwing it in and out, and that can cause it to crack, right? But because of the way this closes, there's not a lot of tension and pressure put on this part of the pen. I think that's done on purpose, and I think that is also an advantage. I like the way they put the logo here. Usually I don't, I think that's unusual too. I think that's a nice design. I like the fact that there isn't a band here because that makes this kind of contiguous resin. It's also nice that they've used the same resin here, and then they have this little bit of decoration here. So it's very nicely done. My guess is, I don't know for a fact, but because this, well, it looks like you'd be able to eyedropper it, but because this is metal, you wouldn't be able to eyedropper it. So forget about that. Now the pen posts, and it does post, seems to post fairly well, but I noticed in practice that it tended to slip off a little bit. And also because this resin is so nice, I feel a little uneasy about posting it. One of the things that does happen with this kind of resin, it's translucent, is that you do tend to see the ink color and it stains a little bit. And you also see here a little bit of the dark. If you're using dark ink, then it will come through. I like that. I think that's fine, but that's just the nature of this kind of beautiful material. That it's whatever's inside. You're going to see a little bit of it. It has a nice clip, and in every way, it's very, very beautifully thought through. A very elegant looking pen, a luxurious looking pen. And, it's not a cheap pen. It's $175, which is, it's not crazy expensive, but it is a steel pen, a steel nib pen. It doesn't, for that, you don't get a gold nib. So it's a bit pricey. Now, after initially coming out with the Estie, they introduced the MV adapter. MV stands for Modern Vintage Adapter, and that's really terrific because that allows you to use one of these nibs on this pen. And you can see the adapter here. So you can see it unscrews and replaces the normal section. I don't think it really ruins the look, but then you lose the contiguous resin, which is kind of nice. But the black looks nice with this, so that's fine. You'll also notice that you have to use it also when you buy this adapter. It comes with its own converter, because the standard JOVO converter won't work with this setup. And that costs around $40. And what you get is the ability to use all the different Esterbrook vintage nibs with the new pen. And Esterbrook is just, there are so many different nibs. That was really the thing that separated Esterbrook from other pen companies in the 50s. They offered something like 48 different kinds of nibs, different grades of nibs. So there were student grades that started with a number 1, and those are, I guess, for students who are taking notes. And then the more expensive grade, which starts with the number 2, and all the way up to the 9 grade pen nibs, which were even better. These are all steel nibs, and they came in music nibs and calligraphy nibs and medium and broad, of course, the size. And so the new Esterbrook company, wanting to make their sort of connection to the past, is really emphasizing, is really bringing that into fruition by introducing this adapter. And I wanted to try it out. And the good news is I was able to not just try it out, but I purchased one of the flex nibs, which is the 9788. So it's one of the more expensive of the vintage Esterbrook nibs. In the old days, it was one of the more expensive, and now still is. It's much desired. So where you can get a standard nib in the 2-line, maybe for $20 on eBay, it costs me something like $40 to get the flex nib, and even that I think is a good deal. Anyway, and I'm happy to report that it writes really, really well in using the adapter. Here it is in the pen. It writes really well and had no flow problems, really excellent. I should say that it is flex is all relative, right? Most of the nibs that I have tried by Esterbrook, and I have so many different pens, and many of the different nibs have no flex at all. They, they might be broad or medium, etc., but they don't really have much line variation. This definitely has line variation. They call it a medium flex, but unlike some flex, it doesn't go from like extra fine to super broad. It really does go between a medium and maybe a little more broad than a broad. It's very smooth, so that's terrific. So I would say it's almost like a semi-flex, but it's a very pleasant nib. I really enjoyed using it in this pen, and I love having the converter to work with it in that particular way. Now, why have I waited so long to get one of these? Well, I think, though, the whole thing is a bit expensive because you have to get the pen for $175 and the adapter is another $40. So, and I have to say, I really do enjoy the vintage pen and writing with it. Another advantage, though, of being able to use these nibs is that the British company Osmiroid, which produces sets, drawing sets and calligraphy sets. I don't think they're in business anymore, but they used to do that. And their nibs are really inexpensive, and these sets you see on eBay all the time for very little money. Their nibs will fit in these pens as well. And they offer a sketch pen nib. Now, they also had a pen which isn't lever filled, but is piston filled. It's kind of lightweight, not my favorite pen, but it too can use the Esterbrook nib. So I've had this need to have a pen that does this, but now that I've tried it, I really like it. I find it very comfortable in the hand. So I'm very grateful to the company for doing this and keeping up this tradition. I will end with 2 drawing samples, one with the Jovo number 6 nib and a stub, and the other with vintage 9788 Esterbrook nib. And finally, I do a quick drawing of one of the amazing Allium ball flowers, purple, that are now in my garden and remind me so much of the Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome. This is the Esterbrook Estie with a Esterbrook Flex 9788 nib. This is Waterman Mysterious Blue and rodeo paper. And this nib is quite wet. And let's see how much flex it has. It's more like a semi-flex, but you can see it goes sort of between it's a medium flex, to almost double broad, or broad, I would say. And it's also very smooth. It's a really nice nib. Now, I got this nib on eBay. It was not cheap. It was around $39. In the 50s, it would have been much less, but who knows how much it would have been in today's dollar. Probably $39 is about what it might have been back then. Anyway, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And I think you can see that it gives you quite a lot of character in the writing. I don't do calligraphy, but I think you can see that it would work for certain kind of calligraphy. So this is a very nice combo to use this pen, which has a modern converter, and it's very pleasant looking and feels nice, with this special adapter and this really nice nib that you can get. And of course you can put all these other kinds of nibs in it. Osmiroid nibs that make drawing calligraphy nibs, or used to, that you can get on eBay. And then all the different kinds of vintage Esterbrook nibs. There are fine, extra fine, broad, special accountant nibs, music nibs. So there's quite a variety that you can use, and they just, you know, screw in and out. So it's a really interesting option. This is the standard Esterbrook Estie with a Jovo nib, and it is a stub, and it has, I have here Waterman Tender Purple, and again this is Rhodia paper. And Truth in Advertising, Denise, who lent me this pen, tends to have her pens tuned, and I have to say this is very, very smooth. Although, you know, I've used Jovo stub nibs, and they tend to be smooth, and they're really, really nice. So this is very, very smooth, and of course it has this nice variety, where if you go left to right, you get thin, when you go up and down, you get thick, and it makes your writing have a nice sort of a variety to it. So very wet. And the thing about a stub nib is it's going to have, it may be even more pronounced because this has been tuned, it tends to have a sweet spot. So if you write with it very quickly and you're not quite in the sweet spot, it will skip a bit. But if you are careful, you can get this variety. And I find this kind of nib to be very nice to draw with, and you can get very expressive, you know, effects. But if you go too quickly, it will skip. As always, if you find this useful, please subscribe. It's a great way to support the channel, and it doesn't cost you anything.